Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. So, today, what I'm going to be talking about is how unhealed trauma can hold you back in your career. Now, unhealed trauma can show up in a load of different ways, like physically, mentally, emotionally, relationally. But today, I'm going to be talking about one specific thing, and that really is the fear of being seen, the fear of being visible, and how a lack of visibility is holding you back in your career. And there's even 50 to 100 different variations of topics on unhealed trauma and how that can show up in the ways that it can hold you back in your career growth. But I'm going to talk about them separately over the course of the next few episodes. But as I mentioned today, I'm just going to be talking about this specific topic, which is a very important topic: visibility, the fear of being seen. And this shows up in so many different ways, especially with work, especially with career. And I work with a lot of corporate executives, CEOs, different high performers from all walks of life, and people that have high pressure careers. And yet it's a common theme. Um, the thread that runs through all these different backgrounds, something that I see time and time again. And this is a fear of being seen. And it takes up so much mental, physical, and emotional energy. It holds people back and keeps them in a stuck pattern for so long. And yet not everybody makes the link between their career stalling or the ability to move to the next level or break through a plateau, and how that can be actually held up or uh, limited by unintegrated unhealed trauma. So when we're talking specifically about the visibility fear, the fear of being seen, a lot of that could be rooted in earlier childhood experiences. This can leave us feeling unsafe to be vulnerable. It can create wounds around worthiness, that feeling of not being good enough. And it really can impact the ability for the authentic self to be seen, for you to be for the real you to step forward. Now, there's a lot of different ways that can show up. There's a lot of different things that can create those wounds, especially when we talk about childhood stuff. We could be talking about various forms of trauma, childhood neglect, emotional abuse. All types of abuse are going to have an impact, but it could also be things like bullying, scenarios where maybe you put yourself forward in life, you spoke up or drew attention to yourself, and you had experiences of rejection, very embarrassing situations, feelings of humiliation, and that can create really, really deep rooted wounds that we might not access maybe consciously day to day, but it's in the subconscious, it's under the hood, it's in the nervous system. And those experiences can impact how an individual internally sees themselves, the mental representation of how they view themselves. That's not what we show out to the world. That's not how we are seen. That's not how we are witnessed. But there's various things that can come up in life, opportunities that we mightn't take because we don't feel resourced, we don't feel able, we don't feel worthy, we don't feel good enough. And it is sometimes connected to those earlier events, those unhealed traumas that are actually holding us back from really stepping on that next stage of growth. And one of the things you have to remember is with the subconscious and especially the predictive brain, it remembers the pain associated with those experiences during various stages of life. And if that happens often enough or over a prolonged period of time, the brain will begin to generalize that certain scenarios, certain forms of growth, certain opportunities are not safe. And then we have all these different survival strategies or adaptive strategies that are formed to try and keep us safe. And it's not really about your happiness. It's not really about your growth. It is literally about keeping you in a predictive pattern. And some of that is centered around not drawing attention to yourself, not allowing yourself to be fully seen, not taking up space, not voicing an opinion, not showing up as the most amazing version of yourself as you can be. Now, as I said, some of these wounds can create beliefs and patterns that impact your behavior, how you see yourself, how you see the world, how you see people around you, how you think you're seen. And that's the thing, that doesn't fit how other people perceive you. You could be a very accomplished, very successful adult, very, very good at what you do. But that internal representation, that internal pain, those internal wounds are limiting what's possible for you to go forward because you don't feel safe on some level. You don't feel resourced. And it can show up as self-sabotage. I'm going to talk about that in a bit more detail going forward. There's loads of ways like avoidance, procrastination, self-sabotage. All these things can show up in your career, show up in your business. These limiting patterns that are connected to older wounds. Now, as I mentioned, when people have went through these things in childhood or in their youth, A lot of these strategies become limiting in the sense that you needed them to survive, and yet they might not actually be applicable for your business. So one of those things could be around voice and opinion. It could be around boundary setting. It could be around people pleasing. For a lot of people, it could also be perfectionism, chronic senses of inadequacy. Even if you take people pleasing, for example, that can lead to burnout. It can also lead to setting poor boundaries with clients, with customers, with your bosses, your colleagues, loads of different things. Perfectionism, being the eternal student, being the person that's constantly like refining, 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 and that's another form of avoidance, not being able to take any kind of constructive action, just putting stuff off, putting stuff off, putting stuff off, not thinking anything's ever good enough. And that can be connected to older wounds. And the thing is, like, if the brain has this ingrained belief that it's not safe for you to be seen, it's not safe for you to grow because there's potential threat or potential harm, then the nervous system is not going to feel safe for you to move out into this next stage, because there's an aspect of yourself that is still carrying wounding from an earlier stage. And as I said, it could be rejection, it could be humiliation, it could be criticism, it could be any amount of different things. But that could be showing up now in your adult life and how you're treating your career, how you're treating your business. And look, it doesn't always necessarily have to go back to early childhood stuff. It could be even like your adolescence. You might have had really bad relationships. You might have had people humiliating you, as I said, bullying you, different things going on. And that also does really drive home the point about the impact of toxic relationships, the impact of unintegrated and unhealed wounding trauma, how that shows up in the nervous system and how that can actually hold you back. Because the thing is, in order to be successful in your business, in order to be successful, in your career, or if you're an entrepreneur, you need to be able to be seen. You need to be able to take up space. You need to be able to vocalize what you really think, what you really feel, your opinions. And that can be kind of scary. It can be scary even at the best of times when you're really confident. But if you've got all this stuff going on under the hood, you might actually neglect or miss out on a load of opportunities. You mightn't put yourself forward for things. A lot of people do struggle with things like public speaking, but it could even be networking. It could be putting yourself forward for a promotion, and you might have all the talent under the sun, you might have all the ability, all the tools. But if you don't feel safe, if you're afraid of judgment, criticism, rejection, humiliation, any of them things from an older period of time that are still under the hood, you're missing out on growth. You're missing out on advancement. You're missing out on opportunity in so many different ways. And I've seen this time and time and time again with high performers. Some people can push through it and push through it and push through it, and maybe the nature of their trauma, the nature of their wounding is holding them back in a different way. It could be affecting them relationally, it could be affecting them in a slightly different way. But you need to be, if you think about it even from like a business perspective, if you can't be seen, you can't promote, and if you can't promote, you can't grow. And that includes the ability to speak with people, to connect with people, to have healthy relational interactions. That includes a customer base, a client base. It also includes with colleagues, but also the ability to put yourself forward for things is going to be rooted in part to how you see and value yourself, and also operating from that place. Really honoring yourself, honoring what you bring to the table, going after what you're worth, putting yourself forward. And there's a lot of long term consequences that come, if you don't sit with the pain that's under the hood, if you don't do the work to make your nervous system feel safe, for allow you to expand and grow into this next season, this next chapter in your career, this next chapter in your business. Because otherwise you're going to be held in that pattern. The subconscious is going to be dictating what's possible for you. And the thing is, like, you could do so much good, you can make so much impact, you'd be able to create more freedom, flexibility, support for your family, for yourself, get that recognition, that validation, all those things that you're capable of doing. And like, until the trauma, and it's not they just root everything on the trauma, but unhealed trauma in a large part impacting how you see yourself is going to hold you back in your career. It's a no-brainer. Now, within that, one of the things that comes up quite a lot, and this is very, very true even with high performers, is the sense of imposter syndrome. Now, this is a feeling of inadequacy, feeling like you're going to be found out, despite you might having buckets and buckets of evidence of your previous successes. It's like all that's discounted. You're constantly discounting the positive. You're ignoring it. You're overlooking it. It's a fluke. It was, I was just lucky or whatever it was. And underneath this, there could be a sense of inadequacy, incompetence, not feeling worthy, not being as good as other people. And that can be rooted in older wounding connected to self-worth. It could be from a parent, a caregiver, an authority figure at a very young age. It could be connected to a lot of different things. But imposter syndrome is something that absolutely has to be worked on. And the thing is, like, when we have like career growth, like moving into new levels, new opportunities, it's like new levels, new devils. Like, a lot of people have to grow through the role, build that competence, build the confidence through experience of doing things. But imposter syndrome can make this very, very, very challenging for people to put themselves forward. Which brings me to the next pattern around self sabotage, which is very, very heavily connected to the fear of being seen, the fear of being visible, because we don't want to be criticized. We don't want to be judged. We don't want to be rejected. We don't want our flaws brought into the light. We don't want people to think we're less than, not capable, stupid, whatever it could be. And how that can show up from a nervous system perspective, consciously or unconsciously, it could be through procrastination. It could be through avoidance. It could be making yourself small, shying away from certain situations, letting other people take credit for your work, letting other people be put forward, as opposed to, even though you know you've got the ability there, if you feel that there's a perceived danger around the next level of growth, the next level of responsibility, and a massive fear of failure, a massive fear of something potentially going wrong, criticism, scrutiny, whatever it is, that you're going to have those self-sabotaging behaviors. And that also includes perfectionism. You get scenarios where people will put things off and put things off. It's not ready yet. It's not ready yet. I need to do this. I need to do this. And that's another adaptive strategy. It doesn't have to be perfect to be able to help people. And that's the thing. Like, it can show up in a number of different ways. And that can be a safety behavior, even within entrepreneurs, holding off on launching the thing, taking the next course of action, because again, there's perceived threat, even on a subconscious level. If there's a threat to the sense of self, you will fall back into an old pattern, because the subconscious isn't sitting focusing on happiness. It's focusing on predictability. As long as you're alive, it feels like it's doing its job. It's trying to protect you from a perceived threat, something that's going to hurt you based on previous experiences that you've had. The brain is very predictive in that sense. And this is why, when we're trying to create profound, deep change, there has to be change on a massive level, not just somatically in the actual physical body, but consciously and unconsciously, working with the subconscious and predictive brain, so that it can update that learning, it can let go, and it can begin to generalize in a more positive way and more empowering way. And also, all those internal pictures, they have to be let go of, they have to be improved upon, they have to be changed, because those wounds, those pictures, those internal representations have created a whole load of limiting beliefs, a whole load of patterns centered around the impact of that unhealed trauma at that point in time. Now, that can create deep rooted beliefs around not feeling good enough, not feeling worthy. If I put myself out there, I'm going to be judged, I'm going to be rejected, I'm going to be humiliated. It'll be like that time before where that happened. And that just perpetuates more of these kind of adaptive behaviors. The beliefs drive the behaviors, and like, we can bring self-awareness to that. But again, if it's very, very deep rooted, sometimes it's outside of our conscious awareness where the origin of these events occurred. We might have to go back, do a bit of exploration and clear them, but it needs to be done. You can talk about things, you can do work on your self-talk, and you can do like exposure work and put yourself in situations. But again, and this is my experience working with a lot of high performers, and working with a lot of different varying types of trauma, the internal picture, perception of how you see yourself is such a profound thing in terms of what you believe is possible for yourself. And if you've got that wounded inner self, those wounds around certain life stages, that is dictating in part how you show up in certain scenarios. And like, we can work on affirmations, we can work on self-talk, but if the internal picture doesn't match the external representation that the world is seeing, we are still going to operate from that place of wounding. And that is why it's so important to sit down, unpack, journal around what's still under the hood, and then cleared, work through it. And there's a number of ways to do this. I'm not saying my way is the best way. I've just found it to be really thorough, not just for myself, but with clients. So again, just continuing on in the conversation around visibility, the fear of being seen, and what way that can manifest, especially with unhealed trauma. I spoke about perfectionism. I feel like I could do a whole episode on perfectionism. I think most people know what that is. It's like striving for flawless work, not wanting any minor criticism at all, and underneath that as a big deep sense of inadequacy. It's the fear of other people seeing it, you then being rejected, judged, criticized, humiliated, whatever it is. And it is an adaptive strategy. It really, really is. Now, within your career, or even entrepreneurially, like, you might hold yourself back, you mightn't take on more responsibility, you mightn't step into a role of authority. And I've seen this time and time again in varying degrees of different careers. People that are very qualified, very able, very capable, not recognizing even their own authority. And that's the thing. It's that can then come back to that perception of self, but also not putting yourself forward for things, not wanting to take responsibility, letting people away with certain things, not speaking up, advocating for the self, putting boundaries on. And that, as I mentioned before, even with like people pleasing and things like that, that can look like over accommodating behavior, people pleasing, putting everybody before yourself, and you are teaching them in a way that this is the norm, this is what they can expect when they're dealing with you, and that cannot be sustainable for a variety of reasons, especially in your career, with your time, with your energy, with your resources. But also, if you think about it from an entrepreneurial perspective, like your clients, your customers, the people that you're serving, even like your colleagues, your bosses, boundaries need to be in place. You need to be able to do that. It's not just for you to be able to take care of yourself, but also they set limitations with others so that the actual working relationship can be healthy, so that you're not taken advantage of, you don't end up burnt out. And you're operating from a place of knowing your value, knowing your worth, and also that others are operating from that place as well. Um, because if that's not the case, then sometimes you can find yourself trying to overextend. And I think with people pleasing, that can be a big element of it, but that can also be with overworking. You talk about workaholics, you talk about, and again, that can be very, very connected to unhealed trauma and wounding, because it's very similar to the person that would numb themselves with distraction, whether it's alcohol, drugs, gambling, sex, work, whatever it is. Work is just another double edged sword. It's something that maybe is more socially acceptable. You maybe get more credit, more praise, because you get short term benefits when you're leaning in. But it can massively, massively strain your relationships. It can strain your work life balance. It can lead to burnout. And again, when you think about that norm, it's also setting an unhealthy precedent on what other people can expect from you in terms of your work, in terms of your output, in terms of what's costing the self, in terms of how you're showing up in that space. And again, until you make it consciously aware that you're doing it, or you can see where the roots of this have stemmed from, that pattern will keep going and going and going and going and going, and it needs to be addressed. And very often it is connected to older patterns. Um, so within visibility, fear of being seen, um, obviously the voice, speaking up is a big part of that as well. Now, one of the ways that this can show up very, very easily, and a lot of people struggle with anxiety, social anxiety to varying degrees, but being able to express opinions, being able to connect with people, being able to make friendships, being able just to relax when they go into certain scenarios. Now, it doesn't have to be public speaking, it doesn't have to be giving talks. Like even what I was saying there about, taking on that role of authority or embracing your authority, talking to people, delivering information. But it is centered around being seen. It is centered around potential criticism, potential rejection, not feeling enough, another person's perception defining you. And that's one of the big things to take away. Another person's limited perception, you cannot ever define you. And it's also not something that you can control. You cannot control how another person perceives you, but you can control how you show up in that space. And this is a big reason why we do the work. So we feel comfortable enough in the self, resourced enough in the nervous system, and that those old pictures and the conscious and unconscious part of the mind have been cleared. They're more empowered, and you're able to show up authentically, show up as the real you in those spaces. Now, if we don't do that, sometimes what can happen is we can feel isolated at work. We can feel, if you're entrepreneurial, you mightn't be doing the necessary networking that you need to be doing, connecting with people, whether it's in person, online, collaborating with people, drawing attention to yourself, and it can become very lonely. You can miss out on a lot of opportunities, and that can create a lot of resentment. It can create a lot of bitterness. It can create a lot of overwhelm and panic, especially if you've got bills due and you know you've got all the ability on the sum, but you're not doing the necessary things that you need to be doing, which in turn can lead to a very negative cycle of negative self-talk and other negative behaviors. How you're coping, how you're trying to numb or look after yourself when you're in that cycle, which again perpetuates those beliefs, those wounds that created those beliefs in the first place, which is often from unintegrated trauma. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time chatting about this, but I'm going to rattle through how this could potentially show up specifically with career, specifically in an entrepreneurial capacity. And I've touched on this a wee bit during this episode, but again, not doing the right marketing, not doing the self-promotion, that's such a big thing that's linked to visibility. And the fear of being seen. Like, I don't want to put myself out there. What if my friends see? What if my colleagues see? What if people at school see? What if my family see? What if people talk? What if they think I'm stupid, or they think what I've put out there on the social media is a load of shit? And the thing is, like, it is rooted in the fear of judgment, fear of criticism, fear of rejection. But how are the people that you're supposed to serve going to find you if you don't put yourself out there? And you're missing out on so much opportunity, so many people that you could potentially help. But if you can't get past the fear of being seen, you can't move on to that next level of service. And it's doing it a service to everybody else. Like, the gifts that you have to bring into the world can't be realized until whatever's holding you back from being seen is integrated. I touched on this just very briefly earlier around boundary setting, but that also comes into pricing. And I've seen this with a lot of different, like, this comes across all industries, but undervaluing yourself, underpricing yourself, fear of being rejected on that, doing too much for people, overextending, not having healthy limits with them, giving away your services for next to nothing, letting people devalue you, devalue your time, not treating you in a way that shows that they value what you're bringing to the table. Um, and that is very, 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 very consistent. You would see that a lot in a lot of different industries. I touched on networking and collaborative relationships. And, like, if you're in that space, whether you're working for yourself or you're in, a slightly different career, relationships are so important. The ability for you to be seen, the ability for you to express yourself authentically, to talk about your thoughts, your opinions, your knowledge, to be able to put that out into the world, to be able to connect with like-minded people, can only happen if you allow yourself to be seen. Now, again, within that, feeling resource to say what you really need, what you think, what you feel, also comes down to you being able to let other people into your space. Now, relationally speaking, and this will be a whole other episode, that can also show up in your ability to let go of control, to trust people, to delegate tasks off to other people. And again, if you've got a fear of failure, or fear of things going wrong, or fear of being seen, like things going tits up, like that it's connected to you, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to be able to hand the reins over to some other people, or to let other team members come in and help you scale, help you grow, delegating tasks. And again, that's connected to that burnout cycle when you take on too much yourself, but it is still all connected. Again, the unintegrated trauma, unhealed wounding, um, stuff connected to the identity. I spoke very, very briefly about perfectionism. And again, from an entrepreneurial perspective, from a career perspective, this could be just stalling on launching the thing that you have, holding back, trying to make it perfect, constantly changing, not picking it, zooming in on very, very minor things, and just using that as an excuse to delay putting it out into the world, delay taking that necessary action. And again, it's rooted in inadequacy. It's rooted in other things that are under the hood that are potentially going on that are unintegrated. Now, when we think about, if we've got that self doubt, if we've got that not feeling good enough, if we've got that wounded sense of self through unintegrated trauma, we're not going to feel resourced to do the next thing, to take the next action, because we're just going to stay in that predictive loop. And as I said, that creates a lack of opportunities. It means we're missing out on potential growth. And that will hold businesses back, it'll hold leaders back, and it'll hold people back in their career, especially if they've got all the tools, all the resources, all the ability, all the talent under the sun. Again, from a safety perspective, you won't be able to access your creativity, you won't be able to take calculated risks to grow, because you will opt for the predictable, safer way of doing things until you actually begin to trust yourself and let go of that old stuff that's been keeping you in that pattern. Now, I spoke very, very briefly about imposter syndrome, but that is that cycle. It shows up so many times within businesses. It shows up with so many high performers. I've connected with so many people that have had that and had to work through it. And it's not industry specific. It's really, really not. It's across the board. It can show up. I did touch on burnout. I could do a whole fucking episode on burnout, because that again is just that overextending, trying to do everything yourself, the workaholic mentality, not the not being able to give up control, not being able to delegate. There's so much stuff that's going on under the hood within that. Also connected to self-worth, trying to prove stuff. There's a lot of stuff that can be going on there, overextending, but it causes so much pain, it causes so much distress. It can lead to exhaustion, it can lead to physiological problems, it can lead to relational problems, strains in all your relationships. And that's not just personally, it can also be professionally, but your work life balance gets chinned. when that's going on, and it can make you very bitter, very resentful, very overwhelmed, and also very mentally unwell, causing you to actually take time away from work, ironically. So I'm going to leave it there. If this has resonated with you in any way, or if you think that you could share this with somebody that it could help them, please do. If there's parts of you that you're feeling seen within this, please get in touch. This is something that you can work through. I can help you with this, and we can clear this very, very effectively. I've done it time and time and time again. I am going to be expanded on this in a series of episodes going forward. If there's anything specifically you'd like me to talk about, please get in touch or comment. I just want to say thanks very much again for listening.